Welcome to this explainer. We are looking at a reality right now that is not just urgent, it's actually incredibly ironic. Nations across Europe that are historically famous for fighting off devastating floods, well, they're now facing the exact opposite problem. They're literally running out of water. So today we're going to explore how advanced engineering, specifically seawater desalination, might just be the lifeline a drying continent desperately needs.
There's this quote from Peter van Dijk, a Dutch agricultural grower, that just hits the nail on the head. He says, "We are world champions in making land dry." And it's true. The Netherlands spent centuries building these incredible dikes and windmills to pump water out of their soggy fields. But now, they're actually too dry. And because the country is so densely populated, there's just no room to build massive reservoirs to store water when it does happen to rain. And look, this isn't just a Dutch problem. We are looking at projections where up to 65 million people across Europe could soon be facing severe water scarcity.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap. We'll start with Europe's new drought reality, then look at the Middle Eastern blueprint for water independence. After that, we'll break down how desalination actually works for policymakers, tackle the carbon cost of water, explore how we can decarbonize all this with solar energy, and finally, look at how short-term lifelines fit into long-term solutions.
Section 1. Europe's new drought reality. How climate change brings drought to the continent. The paradigm shift we're seeing here is just staggering. Think about the historical norm. The Netherlands engineered massive storm barriers to keep the ocean out, and France enjoyed super reliable, abundant rainfall. But the new climate reality? Prolonged heat is severely drying out soils across both countries. Essentially, that arid Mediterranean climate is packing its bags and moving north. So instead of engineering to keep water out, these nations are desperately trying to keep fresh water in. I mean, city planners in the Netherlands are literally peeling up concrete pavement right now just to let rain soak into the ground instead of washing down the storm drains.
65 million. That is a massive number. According to the EU Blue Economy Observatory, if global average temperatures go up by 3 degrees Celsius, the European population exposed to severe water scarcity is going to jump from about 50 million today up to 65 million. That kind of demographic shift is absolutely huge, and it demands immediate action from officials.
To really grasp what this looks like on the ground, just look at the Rhine River. It supplies the vast majority of fresh water to the Netherlands. But because of these brutally hot, dry summers, alpine snowmelts have plummeted, which is basically starving the Rhine. Because of this, Dutch drinking water firms like Dunya, which supplies over 1 million people around The Hague, are now having to look into pumping up slightly salty, brackish water from deep beneath their coastal dunes. And remember, moving heavy water across a completely flat country without any help from gravity, that requires a massive amount of pumping, which means an absolute ton of energy.
Section 2. The Middle Eastern Water Blueprint. Lessons in Water Independence.
So who has already solved this? Well, countries in the Middle East have been dealing with this for decades. Now, oil-exporting nations like Iran historically relied on incredibly cheap domestic fossil fuels to power their energy-hungry water production. But ultimately, it was sheer, unavoidable necessity that built the modern blueprint for water independence in the region. Take Israel, for example. Today, over 80% of Israel's domestic urban water comes from just 5 major desalination plants. 80%! That is a staggering achievement in engineering.
What Israel did was completely decouple its water security from the weather. And again, they didn't do this because being green was trendy. They did it out of pure necessity to survive in a harsh, arid region. But here's the kicker. They didn't stop at desalination. They combined it with a world-leading 87% wastewater reuse rate, sending all that treated water straight to their farms. For European policymakers trying to figure out how to save their own famous agricultural exports, like French wine or Dutch cheese and tulips, when the rain stops falling, this two-pronged approach is the ultimate case study.
Section 3. Desalination explained for policymakers the science and economics of seawater reverse osmosis.
Now, for the politicians and civil servants who actually have to implement this stuff, how does it work? Put very simply, seawater reverse osmosis, or SWRO, forces salty ocean water through highly advanced, semi-permeable membranes at intense pressure. It filters out the salt, and boom, you have fresh drinking water. But the science is only half the battle, right? For a government, the tech only works if the economics work. That brings us to a really critical metric, the feasibility index, or fee. This is just the local market price of water divided by the production cost of the desalinated water. If the cost to produce it is lower than what consumers can actually afford to pay, meaning your fee is greater than 1, then desalination is a go for that region.
So, what goes into that production cost? It's basically split into two buckets. First, you have your capital cost. This fluctuates based on the size of the plant, global technology prices, and the local GDP. Second, you have your operation and management, or O&M costs. This is your day-to-day stuff: routine maintenance, local labor rates, swapping out those high-tech membranes, chemical treatments, and, most importantly by far, energy.
And that energy cost? It really comes down to this figure right here: 3 to 4 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of water produced. Now, to be totally fair, modern reverse osmosis is incredibly efficient compared to the old-school thermal boiling methods, which could use up to 16 kilowatt hours. But still, 3 to 4 kilowatt hours is a huge, huge draw on any national power grid.
Section 4. The carbon cost of water. The environmental trade-off of engineering fresh water.
Which brings us to the great yes, but of desalination. Right now, a huge portion of global desalination is still powered by burning fossil fuels, and obviously that generates massive CO2 emissions. So if Europe rapidly scales up fossil-powered desalination just to combat a drought, we risk solving the short-term water crisis by directly making the long-term climate crisis worse. It's a dangerous feedback loop where making water actually dries up the rivers even faster.
And that is exactly why European policy right now views desalination with a lot of caution. The EU Blue Economy Observatory officially considers it a last resort because of the tech complexity, the high costs, the carbon footprint, and the tricky issue of figuring out what to do with the ultra-salty brine leftover. It's just not a silver bullet, unless, of course, we completely change how we power it.
Section 5. Decarbonizing with solar energy. Mitigating emissions for a sustainable water future.
When you bring renewables into the mix, it is a night and day difference. Traditional fossil fuel plants are heavy polluters, sure, but shifting to renewable solar energy can cut over 90% of the CO2 emissions tied to desalination. By linking water production directly to green energy, we take desalination from being this huge climate liability and turn it into a highly effective, sustainable tool for climate adaptation.
And the tech world is moving incredibly fast on this front. Engineers are rolling out hybrid renewable systems that keep these plants humming 24/7. In places like Saudi Arabia, they're literally building giant solar domes that use concentrated solar power to boil water sustainably. And at the microscopic level, researchers are developing these crazy advanced photothermal materials that float on the water and drastically speed up natural evaporation using just the sun. The main takeaway for officials here is that a zero-carbon water supply, it's not science fiction anymore. It's happening.
Section 6. Short-term lifelines, long-term solutions, a holistic policy approach.
The Joint Research Center's Blue Economy report validates something water experts have been shouting from the rooftops for years. A desalination plant is not a magic bullet. It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Think about it. Pumping expensive, newly engineered fresh water into a leaky, inefficient plumbing system, that is a massive waste of both money and energy.
This is where the Prima holistic strategy comes in. It looks at the entire Mediterranean and European basin and says, okay, true resilience requires a multi-layered defense. Yes, for sure, we need to implement seawater desalination to get new water into the system for the short term. But we also have to mandate wastewater reuse at the same time. We have to aggressively fix pipeline leaks. And most importantly, for the long term, we must promote sustainable agriculture that adds organic matter back into the dirt, enhancing the soil's natural sponge effect so it holds on to whatever rain does actually fall.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Through reverse osmosis, solar power, and smart regional policy, we absolutely have the technology right now to engineer our way out of short-term thirst. But the real question is, do we have the political will and the holistic foresight to engineer our way out of the long-term climate crisis? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.